The grand hall of the HFY Empire was filled with nobles, warriors, and scholars, all gathered under the towering crystal pillars that gleamed in the soft glow of the imperial lights. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne of obsidian and gold, was Emperor Xaltharian, ruler of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. His piercing golden eyes scanned the room before settling on his daughter, Princess Velora. Velora stood tall, her regal posture unwavering, but her fists were clenched at her sides. She had spent her life training, learning, and proving herself to be worthy of her title. She had mastered combat, strategy, and diplomacy. But today, she was facing a challenge unlike any before. Her father had summoned her to make an announcement, one that had already sent whispers spreading like wildfire through the court. "The time has come," Emperor Xaltharian spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "My daughter must choose a mate." A murmur ran through the hall. This was a well-known tradition of the HFY royal family, one that ensured the next ruler had a strong partner. Velora had always known this day would come, but she never expected what her father said next. "I have chosen suitors from the finest warriors, leaders, and scholars across the empire, but among them stands one unlike the others." The emperor's gaze shifted, and the court followed his eyes to the human standing among the alien nobles. Commander Jack Callahan. The murmurs grew louder, some of them turning into gasps of disbelief. A human. Among the suitors for the princess. Jack, standing at the center of the room, had his hands in his pockets, a relaxed stance that stood in stark contrast to the tense expressions surrounding him. He had dark brown hair, a sharp gaze, and a confidence that seemed out of place in a hall filled with towering alien warriors. Unlike the others, he didn't bow or look nervous. He simply raised an eyebrow, as if amused by the whole situation. Velora's expression hardened. She turned sharply toward her father. "A human, father." Her voice was laced with disbelief. "You expect me to choose a mate from my own people, and him?" The emperor remained calm. "The HFY Empire is strong because we are wise enough to recognize potential, even from those outside our kind. Commander Callahan has proven himself in battle and in diplomacy. His strength is undeniable." Velora felt anger bubbling within her. She had spent years training to be a ruler. She had studied the history of her people, their victories, their warriors, and their traditions. Never had a human been considered worthy to stand beside royalty. "I refuse," she said, her voice firm. "I will never choose a human mate." The hall fell into silence. The nobles watched, waiting to see how the human would react to such an insult. They expected him to look humiliated, perhaps even angry. Instead, Jack smirked. "Well, that makes two of us," he said casually. "I wouldn't choose you either." The room, which had been filled with tension, was now filled with stunned silence. Even Velora was caught off guard. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She had expected him to argue, to defend himself, or maybe even to plead his case. Instead, he had dismissed her. Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to him. "You dare speak to me that way?" Jack shrugged. "I don't see the problem. You don't want me. I don't want you. Seems like we're on the same page." Some of the warriors and nobles exchanged glances. Was this human mocking the princess, or was he simply unbothered? Velora's pride would not let this stand. "You are nothing but a soldier of your people," she said coldly. "You may have impressed my father, but you have not impressed me." Jack tilted his head, considering her words. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice calm but full of confidence. "Then I guess I'll just have to show you what a human is truly capable of." The challenge was clear, and for the first time, Velora felt something she hadn't expected: curiosity. The emperor watched the exchange with interest before finally speaking again. "Very well. Since my daughter is unconvinced, let there be a test. Let Commander Callahan prove his worth through trials." The court erupted into whispers. A trial? No human had ever been tested under the laws of the HFY Empire. Velora smirked. Fine. Let him try. He will fail, and this nonsense will end. Jack crossed his arms and grinned. We'll see about that, Princess. As the announcement spread throughout the Empire, excitement and controversy grew. The princess had issued a challenge, and a human had accepted. One thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The HFY Palace was filled with excitement. News of the humans' challenge spread fast, and now nobles, warriors, and scholars gathered in the great arena to witness something unprecedented. No human had ever been tested in the royal trials of the Sci-Fi Empire. Many believed Commander Jack Callahan would fail, proving that humans were not worthy of standing beside their kind. Princess Velora stood at the edge of the arena, arms crossed, watching as the human prepared himself. She still couldn't believe this was happening. A human challenging her people's sacred trials. It was absurd. She would finally expose him as weak, and this ridiculous situation would be over. Jack, however, seemed completely unfazed. He stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders, looking around the arena with a small grin. I hope you're ready, Princess, he said casually. I wouldn't want to disappoint you. Velora's eyes narrowed. You won't disappoint me, human. You'll fail, just as I expect. The first trial was announced. The test of strength. A massive HFY warrior stepped forward, standing at least 2 feet taller than Jack. His name was Gorthak, and he was one of the strongest warriors in the Empire. His body was covered in thick, armor-like scales, and his forearms flexed as he stepped into the arena. The human will face Gorthak in combat, the announcer declared. A warrior's strength is the foundation of leadership. Velora smirked. This was it. No human could defeat that HFY warrior in raw strength. Jack walked forward, looking up at Gorthak, who towered over him. All right, big guy, Jack said with a grin. Let's dance. The battle began. Gorthak lunged forward, swinging a massive fist. Jack ducked at the last second, rolling to the side with surprising speed. The crowd gasped. Humans were supposed to be weak, but this one moved like a trained fighter. Gorthak attacked again, aiming to grab Jack and crush him, but Jack dodged once more. Instead of meeting strength with strength, he used speed and strategy. He studied the way Gorthak moved. Powerful, but slow. Then, Jack saw his opening. He dodged another heavy swing and delivered a precise strike to a nerve point on Gorthak's side. The warrior grunted but remained standing. Jack followed up with a quick kick to the back of his knee, forcing him to stumble. The crowd gasped. No one had ever seen a human move like this. Gorthak roared and charged again, but Jack leaped over him, flipping midair and landing behind him. With one final movement, Jack grabbed the warrior's arm and twisted, using Gorthak's own momentum to throw him onto his back with a loud crash. Silence filled the arena. Then, the announcer's voice echoed. Commander Callahan wins the first trial. Velora's smirk disappeared. Jack dusted off his hands and looked at her. Well, that was fun. What's next? The test of intelligence. The second trial took place in the Royal Hall, where Jack now stood before a table covered in alien technology, ancient relics, and strategic puzzles. Velora leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Strength means nothing without intelligence. Let's see if you can solve these challenges, human. The task was simple. Jack had to figure out how to operate an unknown alien device, one that even some scholars struggled to understand. The nobles whispered amongst themselves. Surely, a human would not understand Sci-Fi technology. Jack examined the device. He pressed a few buttons, flipped it over, and tapped the side. Then he grinned. Oh, I see what's going on here. Velora's eyes narrowed. You understand it. Jack shrugged. Well, it's not that different from human tech. The circuits are layered in a spiral pattern instead of a linear one. That's why it won't activate unless I... He twisted the device, aligning the circuits. The machine hummed to life. Gasps filled the hall. The scholars, stunned, examined the device. How? How did you figure that out? Jack leaned back, smirking. I'm human. We're curious creatures. We like to take things apart and put them back together. It's kind of a hobby. Velora clenched her jaw. He had passed again. The test of endurance. The final trial was set in the harsh desert lands beyond the palace. Velora and Jack were taken deep into the wilderness with only basic supplies. The task: to survive for 2 days without assistance. Velora thought this would finally be the trial where Jack failed. Humans were not built for extreme conditions. But once again, Jack surprised her. While Velora used her knowledge of the land to find shelter, Jack adapted. He built traps for small desert creatures, made fire with nothing but friction, and even discovered hidden water sources by analyzing the terrain. By the end of the second day, when the royal guards came to retrieve them, Velora expected to see a defeated human. Instead, she found Jack leaning against a rock, perfectly relaxed. He grinned when he saw her. So, princess, what's next? Velora stared at him. She wanted to say he was just lucky. She wanted to dismiss his victories. But the truth was undeniable. This human was not weak. And worse, a small part of her was beginning to respect him. The trials were over. Jack had passed them all. The court was in shock. The emperor watched with deep interest, and Velora. She wasn't sure what to think anymore. One thing was certain: this human was far more than she had expected. And that annoyed her. The trials were over, but the storm inside Princess Velora's mind had just begun. Commander Jack Callahan had won. Fairly. He had defeated a warrior in combat, outsmarted scholars, and survived the desert's deadly terrain. No human should have been able to do this. And yet he had. Velora hated to admit it, but Jack was different from the humans she had read about. He was not weak, not clueless, and certainly not afraid. But that did not mean she had to accept him as an equal. As she walked through the palace corridors, her mind spun with frustration. The court had been in chaos after the trials. Some nobles praised Jack's skills, while others were furious that a human had performed better than their own kind. Even her father, Emperor Xaltharian, had watched Jack with deep interest, as if reevaluating his views on humans. Velora clenched her fists. She would not let one human change centuries of HFY beliefs. But then, everything changed in a single moment. The attack. It happened so fast. 1 second, Velora was walking through the palace gardens, alone, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. The next, the air was filled with the sharp hum of energy weapons. A group of masked warriors, cloaked in shadows, appeared from the darkness. They moved with precision, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. Assassins. Velora barely had time to react before the first shot was fired. She dodged, rolling behind a pillar as the blast scorched the ground where she had stood. She reached for her sword, but the assassins were too fast. They closed in from all sides, cutting off her escape. Her heart pounded. Who would dare attack the imperial palace? She parried the first strike, her blade clashing against the assassin's weapon. But there were too many. For every attack she blocked, 2 more came at her. A strike grazed her shoulder, sending pain searing through her arm. She was losing. Then, a gunshot. One of the assassins fell to the ground, a clean shot to the chest. The others turned, searching for the source. And there he was. Commander Jack Callahan stood at the entrance of the garden, his sidearm still smoking, his sharp eyes locked onto the remaining assassins. "Oh, good. I was worried I'd have to go looking for trouble," Jack said with a smirk. The assassins hesitated for a second, then turned their weapons on him. Jack moved. He dodged the first blast, rolling behind cover. The assassins split their focus. Half of them stayed on Velora, while the others moved toward Jack. Velora used the distraction to strike, slashing through the nearest attacker. Another came at her, but she spun and kicked him back. She turned to see how Jack was doing. And what she saw stunned her. Jack fought with speed and precision, weaving between enemy attacks. He grabbed an assassin's wrist, twisting it until the weapon fell from their hands. In one swift motion, he flipped the attacker over his shoulder and fired 2 shots at the others before they could react. He was winning. A human, holding his own against trained killers. Vaylora didn't have time to process it. One of the assassins charged her with a dagger, but before she could react, a loud crack echoed through the air. Jack had punched the assassin straight in the face, sending him crashing to the ground. Vaylora stared at him. "Thought you had that one," Jack said, reloading his weapon. "Guess I was wrong." Vaylora scowled. "I didn't need your help." "Aha. Sure." Jack smirked, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning for more threats. "Any idea who these guys are?" Vaylora shook her head. "They're professionals. They came here to kill someone important." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And that someone is you." Before Vaylora could reply, the last assassin lunged from the shadows. She barely saw him in time. Jack did. With a quick motion, he shoved Vaylora out of the way, taking the full force of the attack. The assassin's blade slashed across Jack's side, cutting through his jacket. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. Instead, he grabbed the assassin's wrist, twisted it, and slammed the attacker into the ground. The garden fell silent. The assassins were down. Jack stood there, breathing heavily, his hand pressed against his bleeding side. He glanced at Vaylora. Well, that was fun. Vaylora was speechless. Jack Callahan, a human, had just saved her life. A moment of realization. The palace guards arrived minutes later, alerted by the sounds of battle. The assassins were taken away, and Jack was escorted to the medical bay. Vaylora followed him, despite herself. She watched as the medic treated his wound, stitching up the cut on his side. He winced slightly but didn't complain. For the first time, Vaylora saw him not as a human, but as something more. He was strong, not just in battle, but in spirit. He fought without hesitation, saved her without fear, and bulled without complaint. She had spent her life believing humans were weak, but Jack had just proven her wrong. And that thought disturbed her more than anything. As she stood there, watching Jack, he suddenly looked up and met her gaze. "You okay, princess?" he asked casually. Vaylora didn't know how to answer. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a clear response. Instead, she simply turned and walked away, her mind full of questions she never thought she'd have. One thing was certain. Commander Jack Callahan was not like any human she had ever known. And that changed everything. The news of the assassination attempt spread quickly throughout the Sci-Fi Empire. Whispers filled the grand halls of the palace. Some nobles were shocked that someone had dared to attack Princess Vaylora within the heart of the empire. Others, however, were more focused on a different detail. A human had saved her life. Commander Jack Callahan was no longer just an outsider who had passed the trials. He was now a hero to some and a threat to others. Vaylora stood on the palace balcony, looking over the city below. The streets were alive with murmurs of what had happened. The royal guards had questioned the captured assassins, but they refused to speak. Someone powerful had sent them, but who? She clenched her fists. Her entire life, she had been told that her people were the strongest, the most advanced, the most honorable. And yet, when danger struck, it was a human who had come to her aid. It bothered her. She turned sharply and walked through the palace halls, heading toward the medical bay. She needed answers. The human in the spotlight. Jack was sitting on a medical bed, his jacket removed, revealing a bandage wrapped around his side. Despite his injury, he looked relaxed, as if nothing had happened. When Vaylora entered, he glanced up at her. "Well, look who it is. Here to check if I'm still breathing." Vaylora crossed her arms. "I want to know why you did it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Why I saved you?" "Yes." Jack let out a short laugh. "What kind of question is that? You were in danger." I helped. Valora frowned. You could have let me handle it. You could have stayed out of it. Jack tilted his head. And let you get stabbed. Doesn't seem like a great plan. Valora didn't respond right away. She didn't want to admit it, but without Jack's interference, she would have lost. Those assassins were skilled, and even she had struggled against them. You humans, she muttered, shaking her head. Jack smirked. We're full of surprises, huh? Before she could reply, the door burst open. A HFY noble stormed in, followed by several guards. His face was twisted in anger. This is an insult to our people, the noble spat. His name was Lord Serath, one of the most influential figures in the empire. His family had served the royal court for generations, and he was known for his strict views on tradition. Valora turned to him, her expression neutral. What is the problem, Lord Serath? The problem? Hexerath pointed at Jack. A human saved you, princess. A human. This is a disgrace to our empire. And now, the people talk of him as a hero. Unacceptable. Jack, still sitting on the bed, raised an eyebrow. You're welcome, by the way. Serath ignored him. This cannot be allowed. Humans should never hold such influence in our kingdom. They are lesser beings, unfit for. Enough. Valora's voice was sharp, cutting through the air. The room fell silent. Jack's eyes flickered with interest. Valora stepped forward. Commander Callahan saved my life. That is a fact. Whether you accept it or not, he has proven his worth. Serath's jaw tightened. Then you defend him. Valora hesitated. Did she? She wasn't sure. But she would not deny the truth. I do not defend humans, she said carefully. I defend actions, and he has done what no one else could. Serath's eyes burned with fury. This is not over, princess. There are those who will not accept a human in our ranks. Remember that. With that, he turned and stormed out. Jack let out a low whistle. Well, that guy's fun at parties. Valora sighed, rubbing her temple. You don't understand how fragile the balance of power is here. The nobles respect strength, but they also fear change. And you are change. Jack leaned forward. Let me guess, some people like that I saved you, but others think it makes your people look weak. Valora nodded. Exactly. Jack shrugged. Sounds like their problem, not mine. Valora stared at him. He was so casual about all of this. Didn't he realize how serious it was? She took a deep breath. This is bigger than you, Jack. You have made enemies today. Jack met her gaze, his expression calm but serious. Yeah, well, so have they. The Emperor's decision. Later that night, Valora was summoned to the royal chamber. Her father, Emperor Xaltharian, stood at the center of the vast room, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light. You have been troubled, my daughter, he said. Valora hesitated, then nodded. The nobles are divided. Some believe Jack is an ally. Others think he is a threat. The Emperor sighed. This was always the risk of inviting a human into our world. But tell me, Valora, what do you think of him? Valora didn't answer immediately. What did she think? Jack was reckless, arrogant, and entirely too confident, but he was also strong, intelligent. And, she sighed, he is different. Her father studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. Then let us see how this difference shapes the future. Valora wasn't sure what that meant, but one thing was certain. Jack Callahan had changed the empire, and there was no turning back. The Grand Palace of Sci-Fi was no longer just a place of power. It had become a battleground of opinions. Some nobles praised Jack Callahan for his strength and bravery, while others, like Lord Serath, saw him as a danger to their traditions. Princess Valora found herself caught in the middle. She walked through the palace halls, her mind filled with frustration. Ever since the trials, and especially after the assassination attempt, Jack's name was on everyone's lips. Warriors debated his combat skills, scholars admired his intelligence, and commoners whispered about the human who had saved their princess. And worst of all, Jack himself knew it. Velora found him in the palace training grounds. He stood in the center, surrounded by Excelfar warriors, each one eager to test him. Jack was unarmed, facing an opponent twice his size. A warrior lunged at him. Jack dodged smoothly, sidestepping the attack and countering with a quick strike to the warrior's ribs. The alien grunted and staggered back. Another warrior charged, swinging a massive fist. Jack ducked, rolling under the attack and coming up behind him. With a swift motion, he tripped his opponent, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd of onlookers murmured in surprise. Velora crossed her arms. He was enjoying this. She stepped forward. Enough. The warrior stopped immediately. Jack turned, his usual smirk in place. Jealous, princess. Velora ignored the comment. You think this is a game? Fighting in the palace, showing off. Jack wiped sweat from his brow. Not showing off. Just proving a point. Velora's eyes narrowed. And what point is that? Jack took a step closer, meeting her gaze. That humans aren't weak. Silence hung between them. Velora clenched her fists. Every part of her wanted to argue, to say that he was wrong. But she couldn't, because he had proven it, time and time again. But she wouldn't let him think he had won. If you truly believe you are my equal, she said, then fight me. The crowd gasped. Jack blinked, then grinned. You sure about that, princess? I'd hate to hurt your pride. Velora smirked. You won't get the chance. The duel begins. The training grounds cleared. Warriors, nobles, and even palace guards gathered to witness the fight. Velora and Jack stood opposite each other, the air thick with tension. This is not a fight to the death, Velora announced. It is a test of skill. Jack rolled his shoulders. All right, no hard feelings when I win. Velora's expression remained cold. I won't lose. The duel began. Velora attacked first, moving fast. Her blade sliced through the air, but Jack dodged, stepping back just in time. She followed up with another strike, but he twisted, avoiding the attack with ease. Jack was fast, faster than she had expected. He countered with a quick jab, aiming for her side. Velora blocked, twisting his arm in an attempt to throw him off balance. But Jack adapted, slipping free and stepping away before she could land another hit. The crowd watched in awe. Jack grinned. You're good. Velora narrowed her eyes. Better than you. She launched another attack, her movements swift and precise. Jack dodged, but just barely. She pressed forward, forcing him to stay on the defensive. Jack blocked a strike, then another. He countered with a feint, tricking her into dodging the wrong way. His next move was fast. He grabbed her wrist, twisting slightly, forcing her off balance. For a brief second, Velora felt a surge of frustration. Then she used it. Instead of resisting, she moved with his grip, flipping her body and using Jack's own momentum against him. In a blink, she twisted free and slammed him onto the ground. The crowd gasped. Jack lay on his back, staring up at her. Then he chuckled. Well, that was unexpected. Velora stood over him, her breathing steady. You are skilled, human, but not better than me. Jack grinned, raising his hands in surrender. All right. You win, princess. Velora offered him her hand. He hesitated, then took it. She pulled him up. Their eyes met. For the first time, she saw something in him that wasn't arrogance. It was respect. And for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong about him all along. A moment of understanding. That night, as Velora stood on the palace balcony, she replayed the fight in her mind. Jack had pushed her. He had forced her to fight harder, think faster, react better. He was not weak. He was not beneath her. He was different. She didn't know what that meant yet. But for the first time, she was curious. The day after the duel, the mood in the palace was tense. Valora walked through the grand halls, her mind swirling with thoughts about the fight. She had won, but it was the first time in her life that she had found herself struggling against someone, especially a human. Jack Callahan wasn't like the others. She had been taught to view humans as weak, primitive beings, but Jack had defied every expectation she had. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of her father's voice. "Valora, come. We must talk." The Emperor stood in the center of his royal chamber, a dark figure framed by the vast windows behind him. His golden eyes, sharp and knowing, fixed on her as she entered. "What is it, father?" Valora asked, her voice steady, but she couldn't hide the uncertainty in her heart. "You have proven yourself in battle," he began, his tone calm but serious. "You have faced the human and emerged victorious. Yet, I sense something has changed within you." Valora lowered her gaze. She knew exactly what he meant. "You are not as sure of your beliefs as you once were," Emperor Exaltharian continued. "And I am not blind to the way Jack Callahan has affected the court. He is no longer just a human soldier. He has become a symbol." Valora's heart sank. She had hoped her father wouldn't notice. The court had already begun to treat Jack with a new level of respect. His actions had already begun to shift the views of many who once looked at him with disdain. "Father, Valora began, but her father raised his hand. "I am not asking for an explanation," he said softly. "I am simply reminding you that your duty is to the Empire. We cannot afford to be distracted by doubts or weaknesses, no matter how skilled the human may be." Valora looked up, her eyes meeting her father's. She could feel the weight of his words. He had never been one for softness or uncertainty. The Empire needed strength. There was no room for hesitation. But what if that strength was something she didn't understand yet? The choice. Later that day, Valora stood in the palace garden, the soft hum of the wind surrounding her. The battle with Jack still lingered in her mind. She had expected it to be a simple victory, a human defeated before her skill and strength. But that hadn't been the case. She felt a presence behind her. "Princess," a voice said. It was Jack's voice. Valora turned, surprised to see him standing there, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I need to talk to you," Jack replied, his expression neutral. She studied him for a moment. There was something different in the way he looked at her. He wasn't the same confident, cocky human she had faced in the arena. He seemed more focused now. "About what?" she asked, her tone guarded. "About the Empire. About you and me." Jack's words caught her off guard. Valora took a step back, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "We're not supposed to be." "Anything," she said quickly. "You're a soldier. I'm the princess. This cannot go beyond what it is." Jack nodded slowly, his eyes steady on hers. "I get it. I do. But," she pressed, already dreading what he might say. "But I've never been good at following rules." "And you," Jack said, his gaze softening, "you've made me question everything I thought I knew." Valora blinked, unsure how to respond. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jack said, taking a step closer, "that I'm not here to just be some soldier in the background. I'm not here to just do what you or your father tell me to. I'm here because I believe in what I can do. And I believe in you." Valora's heart skipped a beat. She had not expected that. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that I don't just want to be a weapon for your empire. I want to be something more. I want to be someone who helps change the way your people see the world, and maybe even see themselves." Valora took a deep breath, her mind racing. Was this what she had been afraid of all along? Jack was not just a human who had fought well in the trials. He was a force, and that force had now set its sights on her. "I don't know if I can trust you," Valora said, her voice trembling slightly. Jack gave a small, understanding smile. I don't expect you to. But I don't need your trust to do what's right. I just need you to see that I'm not like the others. And maybe, he paused, his expression softening, maybe you're not like the others either. Valora stared at him, a storm of emotion swirling inside her. Was he right? Did she have the power to change her own beliefs? To change the Empire? Make your choice, Valora, Jack said quietly, his eyes locked on hers. I'm not asking you to pick me. I'm asking you to pick yourself, what you really believe in. The Emperor's Dilemma. The next day, Valora stood before her father once more. She had made her decision, but the weight of it felt almost unbearable. The choice she had to make now wasn't just about Jack or her duty. It was about the future of the entire Empire. Emperor Xaltharian's golden eyes studied her carefully. What is your decision, Valora? She looked at him, her voice steady but firm. I have decided. I will no longer stand by the old ways. I will not allow fear of change to keep us from progress. The Emperor's gaze softened, but his voice remained cold. You know the cost of such decisions. I do, Valora replied. But I cannot lead a people who are unwilling to grow. Her father was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Then the path is yours to walk, my daughter. You will find that change does not come without sacrifice. Valora nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. But for the first time, she felt free. Free to choose, free to lead, and free to change. And she knew, deep down, that her future, and the future of the Empire, had already begun to shift. The atmosphere in the Sci-Fi palace had changed overnight. Whispers of Valora's decision spread like wildfire, and the Empire's future suddenly felt uncertain. Some viewed her choice as a sign of strength, a bold step toward a new era. Others saw it as a betrayal of centuries of tradition, and feared what might come next. Valora had chosen to align herself with Jack Callahan, and the consequences of that decision would ripple across the Empire. The old ways would no longer control her path. But not everyone agreed with her. A rebellion grows. For days, the tension within the Empire only grew. Valora's allies were few, and her father's most loyal advisors were furious with her decision. Rumors spread of a secret council, one that was working against the changes she had set in motion. Valora sat in her private chamber, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the window. They sparkled against the vast, empty expanse of space, distant and cold, just like the nobility who were now against her. Princess. Jack's voice broke through her thoughts. He stepped into the room, his posture as confident as ever. Valora turned to face him. What is it, Jack? We have a problem, he said, his expression serious. She raised an eyebrow. Another one. Jack nodded, his eyes hardening. A group of noble families is gathering forces. They're planning a rebellion against your rule. They don't want you in charge, and they especially don't want a human to have any say in what happens next. Valora's heart sank. She had known it was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. A rebellion. How many? Enough to make a stand, Jack replied. They've already begun rallying their supporters. It's not just about you. It's about your decision to allow human influence here. They see it as a direct threat to everything they've worked for. Valora clenched her fists. They're willing to destroy everything just to keep things the way they were. It's not about what's right. It's about power, Jack said. They're afraid of change and afraid of you. Valora stood up, her decision already made. We can't just sit here and wait for them to strike. The battle begins. By the time Valora and Jack gathered their forces, the rebellion was already in motion. The rebel leaders had amassed an army outside the capital, waiting for the right moment to launch an attack. The Xelfar Palace, once a symbol of power and strength, now felt vulnerable. Jack and Valora stood side by side, watching as the royal guards prepared for battle. The air was thick with tension, but there was no turning back. They think they can take this from me, Valora said, her voice steady. They think they can destroy everything I've worked for. They're wrong, Jack replied. We'll show them what happens when you try to break something that's already stronger than you think. The battle began with a thunderous roar. The rebels attacked in full force, their weapons firing as they surged toward the gates of the palace. But the royal forces, led by Velora and Jack, were ready. Velora moved swiftly through the chaos, her blade cutting down attackers as she pushed forward. Jack fought beside her, his movements precise and calculated. Together, they formed an unstoppable duo. The rebels, though numerous, were no match for the strength and skill of the royal forces. Jack fought with a ferocity that matched the best of the Sci-Fi warriors, while Velora led her troops with the unwavering confidence of a true leader. Keep pushing, Velora shouted as she cut down another attacker. The palace is ours to protect. Don't let them take it. The rebels began to falter. Their ranks thinned as Jack's precision strikes and Velora's leadership overwhelmed them. The battle raged on for hours, but slowly the tide began to turn. The turning point. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, Velora and Jack found themselves face to face with the leader of the rebellion, Lord Xerath. Xerath, the same noble who had once opposed Velora's decision to allow Jack into the palace, now stood before them, his armor splattered with the blood of fallen soldiers. He was out of breath, but his eyes burned with rage. This isn't over, princess. Xerath spat. You and your human will never win. You'll never rule this empire. Velora stepped forward, her expression unwavering. I've already won, Xerath. Your rebellion is over. The people want change. The people want strength. And that's something you'll never understand. Xerath sneered. You think you've changed anything. This empire has survived for centuries because of our traditions. You're a fool if you believe you can change that. Jack stepped forward, his tone cold. The empire is changing, Xerath, whether you like it or not. Xerath's eyes flickered with anger. He raised his weapon and charged at Jack, but Velora was quicker. With a swift movement, she disarmed him and knocked him to the ground. This is where your power ends, Velora said, standing over him. Xerath's defiance faltered as he realized the battle was lost. You will regret this, princess. Velora looked down at him, her gaze steady and filled with resolve. No, I won't, because I am the change, the future of the empire. With Xerath captured and the rebellion crushed, the Sci-Fi Empire was once again under control. But this time, things were different. Velora's victory wasn't just a military one. It was a statement. She had proven that change could be powerful. She had shown that strength didn't come from tradition alone, but from the courage to fight for something new. As the empire began to rebuild, Velora stood by Jack's side. Together, they had faced the impossible, and together, they would lead the empire into a new era. The battle for the future was not yet over, but Velora had already won. She had chosen her path, and with Jack by her side, the empire would thrive in ways it had never known before.